From translation, NIV New International Version, this 138th day of the year, today we are reading passages 2 Chronicles 28-31, 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 1 to 27. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike his ancestor David, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and also made cast images for Baalim. He burned incense in the valley of Ben Hinnom, sacrificed his children in the fire, and practiced divination and sought omens. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops and under every spreading tree. The Lord his God handed him over to the king of Aram. The Arameans defeated him and took many of his people as prisoners to Damascus. He was also given into the hands of the king of Israel, who inflicted heavy casualties on him. In one day Pekah son of Remaliah, king of Israel, killed 120,000 soldiers in Judah, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Zikri, an Ephraimite warrior, killed Marcia the king's son, Azrikam the official in charge of the palace, and Elkanah, an advisor to the king. Zikri killed them all and took their plunder, because he strongly supported Ahaz. The Israelites took captive from their fellow Israelites women and children, also a great deal of plunder, which they brought to Samaria. But a prophet of the Lord named Oded was there, and he went out to meet the army when they returned to Samaria. He said to them, "The Lord, the God of your ancestors, has been angry with Judah and handed them over to you. But you have slaughtered them in a rage that reaches to heaven. And now you intend to make the men and women of Judah and Jerusalem your slaves. But aren't you also guilty of sins against the Lord your God? Now listen to me. Send back your fellow countrymen you have taken as prisoners, for the Lord's fierce anger rests on you." Then some of the leaders of Ephraim, Azariah son of Johanan, Berechiah son of Meshillemoth, Hezekiah son of Shallum, and Amasa son of Hadlai, confronted those who had returned from the battle. "You must not bring these prisoners here," they said to the men returning from battle, "for you intend to add to our sin and guilt. Our guilt is already great, and the fierce anger of the Lord is on Israel." So the soldiers gave up the prisoners and plunder in the presence of the officials and the entire assembly. The men designated by name took charge of the prisoners. From the plunder they clothed all those who were naked. They provided clothes and sandals, food and drink, and healing balm for the wounded. They put the weak on donkeys and took them all to their fellow Israelites at Jericho, the city of palms, and then returned to Samaria. At that time King Ahaz sent to the Assyrian kings for help. The Edomites had again come and attacked Judah and carried off captives. The Philistines had raided towns in the foothills and in the Negev of Judah. They captured and occupied Beit Shemesh, Ajalon, Gederoth, Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages, as well as live in those places. The Lord had humbled Judah because of Ahaz king of Israel, for he had promoted wickedness in Judah and had been most unfaithful to the Lord. Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria came to him, but he gave him trouble instead of help. Ahaz seized treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the palace and from the officials, and gave them to the king of Assyria, but it did not help him. In his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus who had defeated him, for he thought, "Since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped me, I will sacrifice to them so they will help me." But they were the downfall of him and all Israel. Ahaz gathered together the furnishings of the temple of God and cut them in pieces. He shut the doors of the temple of the Lord and made altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. In every town in Judah, he built high places to burn sacrifices to other gods and provoke the Lord to anger. The other events of his reign, all his achievements and how he made war, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Ahaz rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of Jerusalem, but he was not placed in the tombs of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son succeeded him as king. 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 1 to 36. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his ancestor David had done. In the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and Levites, assembled them in the square on the east side, and said to them, "Listen to me, Levites. Now consecrate yourselves and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all defilement from the sanctuary. You have not been responsible for this, your ancestors were, but you fasten your guilt on yourselves because of your sins against the Lord your God. My sons, do not be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him and serve him, to minister before him and to burn incense. Organize yourselves by your ancestral families, according to your divisions, as directed by King David of Israel and the genealogical records of his ancestors, and carry out the duties of the Lord his God. Then report to me by the number of your families, for you are consecrated to the Lord. You are to seek him, and he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you forever. The Lord is angry with all of us these past few years. His hand has been heavy on us. We have not been able to offer our sacrifices or burn incense to God. But now that the Lord has given us rest from our enemies, all who have come together to Jerusalem should do the same. Now consecrate yourselves and the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and carry away the defilement from the sanctuary. Then these Levites set to work. From the Kohathites, Mahath son of Amasai and Joel son of Azariah. From the Merarites, Kish son of Abdi and Azariah son Jehalelel. From the Gershonites, Jo son of Zimmah and Eden son of Jo. From the descendants of Elizaphan, Shimri and Jewel. From the descendants of Asaph, Zechariah and Mattaniah. From the descendants of Heman, Jehuel and Shimei. And from the descendants of Jeduthun, Shemaiah and Uzziel. They assembled their fellow Levites and consecrated themselves, and went in accordance with the king's orders, with the trumpets and the cymbals to play the instruments of God that the king had ordered. The priests went into the temple of the Lord to purify it. They brought out all the unclean things they found in the temple of the Lord, the courts of the temple of the Lord, and made the temple of God ritually clean again. They began the consecration on the first day of the first month, and by the 8th day of the month they reached the portico of the Lord. For 8 more days they consecrated the temple of the Lord itself, finishing on the 16th day of the first month. Then they went in to King Hezekiah and said, "We have purified the entire temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, and the table for the consecrated bread with all its articles. We have prepared and consecrated all the articles that King Ahaz removed when he was unfaithful, and they are now before the altar of the Lord." Then King Hezekiah rose early and assembled the city officials, and went up to the temple of the Lord. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 male lambs and 7 male goats for a sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary and for Judah. The king commanded the priests, the descendants of Aaron, to offer these on the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the bulls, and the priests took the blood and sprinkled it on the altar. Next they slaughtered the rams and sprinkled their blood on the altar. Then they slaughtered the male lambs and sprinkled their blood on the altar. They brought the goats for the sin offering before the king and the assembly, and they laid their hands on them. The priests then slaughtered the goats, and used their blood on the altar as a sin offering to make atonement for all Israel, because the king had commanded that the burnt offering and the sin offering be made for all Israel. He stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with cymbals, harps and lyres in the way prescribed by David, Gad the king's seer, and Nathan the prophet. This was commanded by the Lord through his prophets. The Levites stood with the instruments of David, and the priests with the trumpets. Hezekiah gave the order to sacrifice the burnt offering on the altar. As the offering began, singing to the Lord began also, accompanied by trumpets and the instruments of David king of Israel. The whole assembly bowed down, and they worshipped God as well as the king. Then King Hezekiah and the officials ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. So they praised with gladness and bowed down and worshipped. Hezekiah said, "Now that you have consecrated yourselves to the Lord, come and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings, and all whose hearts were willing brought burnt offerings. Hezekiah said, "Now that you have consecrated yourselves to the Lord, come and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings, and all whose hearts were willing brought burnt offerings. The number of the burnt offerings the assembly brought was 70 bulls, 100 rams and 200 male lambs, all from the possessions of the king and his officials. The animals designated for the burnt offerings totaled 600 bulls and 3,000 sheep and goats. The priests, however, were too few to skin all the burnt offerings, so their relatives the Levites helped them until the task was finished, and until other priests had consecrated themselves. For the Levites had been more conscientious in consecrating themselves than the priests had been. The burnt offerings were plentiful, along with the fat portions of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings accompanying the burnt offerings. So the service of the temple of the Lord was re-established. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced at what God had brought about for his people, because it was so sudden. 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verses 1 to 27. Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. The king, his officials, and the whole assembly in Jerusalem decided to celebrate the Passover in the 2nd month. They had not been able to celebrate it at the regular time because not enough priests had consecrated themselves, and the people had not assembled in Jerusalem. The plan seemed right to the king and to the whole assembly. So they proclaimed throughout all Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, to come and celebrate the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel, at Jerusalem, because they had not celebrated it as prescribed for a long time, any such days as written in the law. At the king's command, couriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his officials, which read, "People of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to you who are left, who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your ancestors and your fellow countrymen, who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, so that he made them an object of horror, as you see. Do not be stiff-necked, as your ancestors were. Submit to the Lord and come to his sanctuary, which he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. If you return to the Lord, then your fellow Israelites and your children will be shown compassion by their captors, and will come back to this land, for the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate. He will not turn his face from you if you return to him." The couriers went from town to town in Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as Zebulun, but the people scorned and mocked them. Nevertheless, some from Asher, Manasseh and Zebulun humbled themselves and went to Jerusalem. Also in Judah the hand of God was on the people to give them unity of mind, to carry out what the king and his officials had ordered, following the word of the Lord. A very large number of people assembled in Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of unleavened bread in the 2nd month. They removed the altars in Jerusalem and cleared away the incense altars and threw them into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the 2nd month. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the temple of the Lord. They took up their regular positions as required by the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests sprinkled the blood handed to them by the Levites. Although most of the many people from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun had not purified themselves, yet they ate the Passover, contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "May the Lord, who is good, pardon everyone who sets his whole heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of his ancestors, and who does not ignore his commands and regulations." The Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem celebrated the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days with great rejoicing, since the Lord had made them joyful by changing the attitude of the king of Assyria toward them, so that he aided them in the work on the house of God, the Lord. So the Levites and the priests stood ready to minister and sing praises to the Lord, as did the trumpeters and the musicians. This went on for days, and the Israelites who were in Jerusalem celebrated with great joy. Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites, who showed great understanding in the service of the Lord. For the 7 days they ate their assigned portions, and offered fellowship offerings and made confessions, and worshipped the Lord, the God of their ancestors. The whole assembly then agreed to celebrate the festival 7 more days. So they celebrated for 7 days with joy. King Hezekiah of Judah provided 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep and goats for the assembly, and the officials provided 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep and goats. A great number of priests consecrated themselves. The whole assembly of Judah rejoiced, along with the priests and Levites and all who had assembled from Israel, including the foreigners who had come from Israel and those who lived in Judah. There was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. The priests and Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard them, for their prayer reached heaven, his holy dwelling place. 2 Chronicles chapter 31, verses 1 to 21. When all this had ended, the Israelites who were there went out to the towns of Judah, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. They demolished the high places and the altars throughout Judah and Benjamin, and in Ephraim and Manasseh. After they had destroyed all of them, the Israelites returned to their own towns and to their own property. Hezekiah assigned the priests and Levites to divisions, each of them according to their duties as priests or Levites, to offer burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, to minister, to give thanks, and to sing praises at the gates of the Lord's temple. The king contributed from his own possessions for the morning and evening burnt offerings, and for the burnt offerings on the Sabbaths, at the new moons, and at the appointed festivals, as written in the law of the Lord. He ordered the people living in Jerusalem to give the portion due the priests and Levites, so they could devote themselves to the law of the Lord. As soon as the order went out, the Israelites generously gave the first fruits of their grain, new wine, olive oil and honey, and all that the fields produced. They brought a great amount, a tithe of everything. The people of Israel and Judah who lived in the towns of Judah also brought in the tithes of their herds and flocks, and a tithe of the holy things dedicated to the Lord their God, and they piled them in heaps. They began doing this in the 3rd month and finished in the 7th month. When Hezekiah and his officials came and saw the heaps, they praised the Lord and blessed his people Israel. Hezekiah asked the priests and Levites about the heaps, and Azariah the chief priest, from the family of Zadok, answered, "Since the people began to bring their contributions to the temple of the Lord, we have had enough to eat and have plenty left over, because the Lord has blessed his people, and this great amount is left over." Hezekiah gave orders to prepare storerooms in the temple of the Lord. And this was done. Then they faithfully brought in the contributions, tithes, and dedicated gifts. Conaniah, a Levite, was in charge of the distributions. Shimei his brother was the second in charge. Jehiel, Azaziah, Nahas, Asahel, Jeremoth, Jozabad, Eliel, Ismachiah, Mahath and Benaiah were supervisors under Conaniah and Shimei his brother, at the direction of King Hezekiah and Azariah the chief priest of the house of God. Korah son of Imnah the Levite, the keeper of the east gate, was responsible for the freewill offerings given to God, and distributing the contributions dedicated to the Lord, and also the consecrated gifts. Eden, Miniamin, Jeshua, Shemaiah, Amariah and Shechaniah assisted him faithfully in the towns of the priests, distributing to their fellow priests divisions, old and young alike. In addition, they distributed to the males registered by genealogy who were 3 years old or more to all their little ones, the wives, and the sons and daughters of the entire community listed in the genealogies, for all their little ones and their wives had set themselves apart for the holy work. The priests, by families, and the Levites, by divisions, distributed to all the males among the people listed in the genealogies who were 3 years old or more, as well as to the little ones and their wives. The genealogies included all their little ones, their wives, their sons and daughters, throughout the entire household, for they were faithful in consecrating themselves. As for the descendants of Aaron, the priests who lived on the farmland around their towns, or in any of their other towns, men were designated by name to distribute portions to every male among the priests, and to all who were recorded genealogically among the Levites. This is what Hezekiah did throughout Judah, doing what was good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. In everything that he undertook in the service of God's temple and in obedience to the law and the commands, he sought his God and worked wholeheartedly, and so he prospered.